Good evening, everybody. It's 9:30 on the East Coast, 6:30 on the West Coast. That must mean it's time for your weekly Calamity Jane live stream. James, how are you doing on this midwinter celebratory Monday? I don't know. I was going down a thread and then I abandoned ship on it, pulled the ripcord, and any other mixed metaphor that you want. How are you doing? I guess. I mean, rather than being clever, I guess I could just say, "How are you doing?"
Yeah, I mean, you pull the ripcord, so I'll be your parachute. I'll try to help you
Or no,
land safely.
there's no salvaging my disaster piece.
It's fine. It's fine. It's all good. Everything's good over here. No complaints really. Been flying back and forth between Utah and LA, but I'm back in LA for a little bit, but I'll be back in Utah for a little bit. So I'll keep bouncing around, and so that's part of the reason why I'm on my iPad tonight, just hanging out. Sometimes I got to do stuff on mobile stuff. So yeah. How are you? How are you doing over there?
Doing all right. Doing all right. I had today off, and I just had a really busy weekend. So I just decided to sit and veg out all day and binged Alice in Borderlands all day.
Did you finish season 1?
I did finish season 1. Yes, I am
great.
2 episodes into season 2 at this point.
Okay, so now you're ahead of me.
Yeah.
Way back. I mean, it's been what, 2 years since
something like that. Yeah, it was it was a while.
The thing is, we live in a great time because there's so much good TV too that you can kind of just add it to your pile to eventually get to. But Alice in Borderland, I remember telling you, like, you got to watch the show at some point when you can, because I thought it was really good myself. But yeah, now season 2's out, but I haven't had time to watch it. Now you're ahead.
Yeah.
So that's kind of funny.
Yeah, and I don't want to, the season 2 is, the stakes have been raised in a big way.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't want to like say anything. I don't want to spoil it, but I enjoy it. It's one of these things where a lot of times TV and movies do video games better than video games do video games. At least in the context of providing meaning to the interactivity. Right? Like, so few video games actually leverage the interactive nature of the medium to enhance the experience of the player. I mean, a couple of great examples are like BioShock, right? Which is one of the, to this day, one of the best twists in video game storytelling. And there's a couple of other really good story games. But generally speaking, games don't really utilize their best asset to tell any sort of interesting or make interesting commentary about anything, quite frankly. But things like Scott Pilgrim versus the World and Alice in Borderlands and in Borderland and a few other TV shows that are inspired by video games, they do some really interesting stuff with the concept of video games and tell a more interesting story, or and express more interesting ideas than most video games do, right? Video games are still trapped in this state of arrested development. I feel like they never really got beyond zombies and guns, right? And there are guns in Alice in Borderland, but it goes so far beyond the very rudimentary symbology of most video games. And I think part of the problem too is that video game writers think that they're more clever than they actually are. I have a friend who was playing. She was with her boyfriend, and they were playing. The PS4 game Until Dawn, which is sort of an interactive horror.
Yeah, you're supposed to stay stay alive till dawn.
Yeah,
and all the zombies fizzle or something like that.
Well, no, it's a choose your own adventure. It's a choose your own adventure game. I don't remember what the villains were. Where the monsters were, but it's supposed to be a little cheesy, and it's kind of a choose your own adventure thing, and different characters die, and the story kind of changes based on that. And my friend, who is an actual playwright, published playwright, right? Like, this isn't just an amateur writer. This is someone who's had actual work published. She was playing with her boyfriend, and I was talking to her about it. I'm like, well, what do you think? She said, are all video games this badly written? I'm like, yep, they are. And she goes like, do they know that they're not good at writing? I'm like, nope, they think they're amazing. It's interesting to me. And I don't know where this sort of self-inflated sense of art comes from with video game writers. Because I worked in the games industry a long time, and I've spoken to a lot of video game writers, and their sense of brilliance is remarkable. I've met now some writers I know. They're just they're working, they're doing their job,
Mm-hmm.
they're just trying to enhance the gameplay. But I've met some writers who just they really think that they're Thoreau or Poe or you know
Mm.
right Dickens, or they really think that they're changing the world.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really interesting. I don't know where the disconnect comes from with a lot of these writers, but when you actually have actual screenwriters and playwrights looking at this stuff going, oh my god, this is really bad, you're like, yeah, no, I know, I know that. So
Huh. Man, I didn't expect to. You gave me a lot to. This is a more heavier subject that I want to kind of talk to you about. But here I am about to play with 3D and tax my processing, my little two core processor on that. So I wanted to definitely talk to you about that. But man, and this is gonna be daunting for me as I jump in and try to
yeah.
live stream stuff at the same time. But yeah, I think it's a fascinating. It's a fun subject to talk about. And you and I, we talk about it off and on. I always find it fun to talk about because I'm not 100% agreeing with you with a lot of it, but yeah, I do agree with you on some of it, which is kind of funny. Which is why I'm sitting there going, yeah, you're right about. I agree with you on this one, but wait about this, and that's where I'm at. Like, I want to do the what about this parts, and then
Yeah, yeah,
talk
yeah.
about it a little bit.
Well, prove me wrong. I love being proven wrong because then
No, I
that's
don't
how I
know.
learn. That's how I grow,
Yeah, but it's
right?
not necessarily the challenge though. Is we're talking about we're still even the nature of video games. I consider it an art form, and I don't know if you do.
I don't think
As
video
much.
games holistically are art. I think that there's a
Yeah,
lot of art in video games,
yeah.
but
I get it,
I
but
don't think video games are art.
yeah, and this is where I think.
I think it's a highly expressive artistic
Mm-hmm,
medium, but I've
mm-hmm.
never played a video game that I would holistically call art.
A piece of art.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. But yet we talk about film and movies, and that's art, right? I mean, we're still
Sure.
seeing that. It still
Sure.
does. The only difference is like you're interacting with it, so it's just interactive. It could be considered an interactive movie, but that's also the downfall because it's not a
Mm-hmm.
movie. Because
Mm-hmm.
movie, you're supposed to just be passively engaged with it.
And I would
Yeah.
disagree
So.
with you there because I find movies to be incredibly actively engaging.
Mm,
It's one of the reasons why like a lot of people will like watch TV or watch a movie and they'll just
mm-hmm,
scroll on their phone, and then you ask them about the movie later and they're like, I don't know, right? Because they're only when you only passively observe this medium, you miss so much of it, right? But
mm-hmm,
when you are actively engaging with it, when you are trying to appreciate the plot, when you were thinking about the story, when you're thinking about, and I'm not saying all movies are art because not all movies are art,
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
but um, when it reaches that level, it engages me in a different way than video games engage me. Video
mm,
games engage me in a challenge to overcome, right?
mm-hmm,
It doesn't challenge me philosophically. It doesn't challenge me as existentially. I have this obstacle. I have these rules that bind me, and I have to overcome this obstacle within the bounds of the rules, right?
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And again, something like BioShock will trick me, and it will impact me as existentially, but it's so phenomenally rare. And BioShock was an accident based on a lot of the people who I know who worked at Irrational who made that game.
Mm-hmm.
BioShock, as it was released, was basically done in 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
And it was kind of an accident. That's why, in my opinion, BioShock Infinite has like this meaningless, horrible story. And it's because they didn't realize that what they did on accident, and then they tried to
Mm-hmm.
replicate that intentionally and then failed to, right?
Mm-hmm.
In my
Yeah.
opinion.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and but when I'm actively engaged in a movie, I am watching it. I am looking at what the director is trying to tell me. I am intentionally participating in the
Mm-hmm.
story, right?
Yeah.
And so I don't consider Like I mean, when I'm watching Alice in Borderland, I'm not playing games. I'm not scrolling on my phone. I'm watching that. I'm engaging. I'm watching how Arisu is going to overcome this next challenge, and how
Hmm.
I'm trying to think and figure out actively what he's going to do, and then when I figure it out, I'm like, oh, cool, I figured it out with him. And then when I don't, I'm like, oh, that's interesting. And then I start thinking about like, were the writers cheating, or was it clever, right? And
Hmm.
my brain is actually processing it in a different way, than what my brain is doing when I'm playing a video game, right? I'm not thinking about, can Mario make this jump? I'm thinking about, what
Hmm.
does this actually mean, right?
See, I guess so maybe I'm being.
Are
I
you
think
going
I'm.
to draw things, or are we just going to have?
I don't know. See, that's the thing is you got me. I'm such of all nights. This is the time to talk about this. Like, oh
Yeah.
my
No,
gosh,
I mean this, but it's valid, because now we're getting into storytelling, and it's something we don't really spend a lot
yeah,
of time doing on the stream,
yeah,
and I think just talking about the nature of story is valuable, even if we don't actually do any art tonight. So I think that's fine. Or you
yeah,
do art while I
yeah.
sit there and. But yeah, I mean that's my
Uh,
thought. Like everybody says, oh, TV movies are passive, and they're really not. I mean, if you've ever gone to, like, a perfect example to me was when I went to go see Grindhouse at the Chinese theater in
uh,
L.A.
uh,
Um, everybody was actively participating with it,
hmm.
right? Just
Sure.
really
Hmm.
engaged, cheering, laughing.
Hmm.
Another movie where you were actively engaged is Rocky Horror Picture Show, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Amazing. It is amazing to go to Rocky Horror Picture Show, because it's
Yeah.
the audience is actively participating with the movie, getting up, saying lines that they've made up. The one that I went to, they actually had actors come on and, like, perform the movie in real time with
Yeah.
costumes while the movie is playing, right? I
Sure.
mean, it's
Sure.
it's
Yeah.
not a passive experience when you go see Rocky Horror Picture Show. Same with The Room, right? People throw
Uh-huh.
spoons at the screen every time
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
spoon painting comes on. It's almost like a
Yeah.
concert, right?
Mhm.
Um,
But here's the difference. I think I understand what you're saying, but I think I'm being a little more literal with saying passive versus active, because
mhm.
ultimately, as the viewer, yes, you can have an emotional stake in watching it, but the only power you really have is hitting the play button or the pause button or turning it off. You have no say in what's going to happen to the character. You can figure it
Right,
out on your own and yell at the screen, but you have no impact on that
right,
character's life.
right.
Whereas if I'm playing just go with recent stuff here. I'm playing God of War Ragnarok.
Yeah,
Well, I have a lot of stake in it if Atreus is going to make this or not, or I'm not going to play the game, and I'm not
right,
going to see what's going to happen to
right.
Atreus. And I have a lot of stake in like his skill tree and like how he builds his character and stuff like that. I mean, I guess that's where I'm getting at
But I would argue
passive
that
versus
your
active.
I would argue that your interactivity is as futile as sitting and watching a movie in a game like God of War Ragnarok, because at the end of the day,
Mm-hmm.
Atreus and Kratos have to get to point B, right? Just
Mm-hmm.
because
Yeah,
you're
no
the
matter
one
what. Yeah.
pushing forward on the thumbstick to take Kratos from point A to
Yes.
point B,
Yeah. Yeah, that's
ultimately
true.
he still has to get there, right?
Yeah,
And
if
it,
you want to see the story, yes.
right,
But
right,
see, you have to actively do that. Whereas, and when you watch a movie, you just push play and that's it, and you watch it. Like, there's nothing else you can do. There's nothing else you can say or do to help or guide along. It could
yeah,
be. I can see it as being an illusion of sorts, but not really, because if you don't play it, then Atreus never gets there. Now you can go on
right,
YouTube and watch it, and
right.
then also now you become a passive viewer and you're watching somebody else play it, and you're watching a director tell the story, and and then it just becomes a viewing piece of art form that you're watching. Whether you know if it engages you the same way or not, I don't know.
I can't
But that's the
imagine
only
it,
thing
it
I
is,
think.
because as a medium, everything about a video game is designed for the button press,
Yes,
right?
yeah, yeah,
But
yeah.
and I would argue, though, with movies, a movie doesn't happen if you don't press the play button,
Mhm,
right? It
mhm.
doesn't. A movie is not playing sort of. It's like if a tree falls in the wood doesn't make a sound, right? I mean, a movie doesn't play if you don't press the button. And I know
Mhm.
that that's kind of a straw man, but I mean, I would argue that your interactivity with video games is an illusion. It's not real, because
Yeah, I can
ultimately,
see that.
yeah,
Yeah,
ultimately you
but
don't have any control. The designers have all of the control, and all you are doing is fulfilling their intention, right? Even in an
there's
open
yeah,
world
yeah.
game, right? there is a finite amount of things that you can do on the map.
Mm-hmm.
It's not
Mm-hmm.
truly a real world.
No,
And
no.
right, and so at the end of the day, you know, you exist in a finite probability space that was created by a series of designers. And yes, you can interact your way through it, but you're very still in a very, very small box. Even in a giant open world game like Red Dead Redemption 2, 90% of that world is meaningless. It's just environment art.
But everything you're saying could also be applied to a movie
Right, right.
space.
I guess
You
so.
know,
I guess so.
yeah, because because yet, but you have even less control. Because even with a video game, and perfect example, when you and I talk about this, and I love Dark Souls, for example. You hate Dark Souls
I
because
hate
there's
Dark
skill based.
Souls.
Yes, because there's skill involved with it. There is that whole get good community that goes, you better get good or you
Right.
won't be able to get this boss. There is even the programmers themselves. Some of them can't even do some of the stuff that they see once another human interacts with their art piece or technology, whatever you want to call it. Whereas a movie, you have no, you just again you just push play and you watch it, like, and then you're just either you can either the only thing you can do as a viewer is get up and leave, or watch or sit through it the whole thing because you paid money to go see it,
Yeah.
etc. Avatar comes to mind.
Oh man.
But yeah, but yeah, that's yeah. But what's funny is like everything you're saying is everything I could just apply to a movie too, and it's just you just have one less. You have a large a larger set of button presses when you're playing a video game, but there is skill
Mm-hmm.
involved where there's no skill involved pushing play or pushing pause or turning on a TV, depending on if you have a smart TV or quote unquote dumb,
Mm-hmm.
a
Yeah, yeah,
dumb TV. Yeah.
yeah.
But
Um,
anyways,
but I think honestly, it's that interactivity that makes it so that games, as a general rule, for me, don't reach the level of art. And
mm,
and here's why.
mm,
The people who make movies fully understand all of the strengths and limitations of their medium. And again, not all movies are art. And I'm not asking all video games to be art. Like I'm not asking any creative medium to only produce art. You're allowed to just produce fun things. Like I went and saw Plane last week, and it was great. It was a great
mm.
kind of
It's a
90s throwback
Gerard.
action. Gerard Butler and Mike Coulter,
Mm,
right?
mm,
Super fun. Wouldn't call that art. I mean, there are artistic elements within it, but it doesn't
mm,
rise to the level of art for me. And it's a subjective line that's different for everybody, obviously. Um, but for me, when a movie attains that level of art, right? What I watch it, I consider it art. Like Everything Everywhere All at Once, to me, is a work of art, right?
mm, mm.
It's because the filmmakers and the actors and everybody involved in it understand every strength and every limitation of the medium and
Yeah.
utilize it
Mm,
to make the sum of the parts greater than the whole, right?
mm, mm,
I have played very, very few games in my life where I feel like the sum of the parts is greater than the whole in such a way that I think about something. Okay, Mario
mm,
Odyssey is a game I adore. I've played through Mario Odyssey at least twice, right?
mm.
There are amazing pieces of art in it. And
Yes,
this,
in
this
it.
is
Yeah.
where the word art gets really muddy, right?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, such a yeah. We're debating something that's so subjective already,
Right,
but
right.
but I still like it. I still enjoy
Yeah,
talking
yeah,
about it.
yeah.
So
But
yeah.
collectively, as a product, Mario Odyssey is a game. It's not a work of art. It has
Hmm.
artistic elements in it that are pretty to look at and enhance the interactive aspects of it. But I didn't walk away from Super Mario Odyssey feeling impacted,
Hmm.
right? When I saw Everything Everywhere All at Once, I felt different at the end of that
Hmm.
movie.
Hmm.
I felt like
Sure.
I learned something about myself. I felt connected because there were elements of that movie that visually expressed things that I feel, and being seeing that on the screen made me connected to it. It made me feel connected to something,
Mm.
right? I I've played over 1,000 video games probably in my life, maybe more than
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
I have never once in my life felt the way that that movie made me feel, and it's not the only one, right? There are plenty of movies. I mean, 50 movies I can think of off the top of my head that affected me on a level that I feel almost changed as a result of experiencing the art that it shared with me. I have
Mm-hmm.
never even come close with not even 10%. Any video game has ever made me feel close the way
Mm-hmm.
Everything
You
Everywhere.
didn't get the emotional resonance that you do with a movie or a book,
Exactly,
right?
like,
Yeah.
Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, or you know Brick, right? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
Brick is a great example, right? It's this brilliant Ryan Johnson's first movie. It's this brilliant
Mm-hmm.
neo noir, kind of inspired by the Dashiell Hammett style hard boiled detective mystery, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's set in a contemporary California high school. It's brilliant. I mean, it really like goes on these twists and turns. It makes you wonder what is the nature, who is a hero and who is a villain, and at the end of it, it made me want to write, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now let's
Mm-hmm.
take a game that has high acclaim even to this day, L.A. Noire, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's a garbage mystery. It's a garbage story.
Mm-hmm.
It's it. I played through it and I got to the end of it and I'm like, cool, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that was it. I mean, I didn't feel anything, right? It never at any point made me feel something. And they tried. They tried to make you feel things. This story of a World War II veteran with a dark
Mm-hmm.
past and him trying
Yeah.
to redeem himself but failing because he gets caught in the seedy underworld of the Los Angeles gang scene. And then there's a tale of redemption at the end of the story. And I don't even remember all the details, but
Mm-hmm.
I felt nothing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And a part of the problem is that, and we've talked about this before, there is a cognitive dissonance between the character that's portrayed in these non-interactive cutscenes and then the character that it
Yeah.
becomes when
That's
you
your
take
biggest beef.
control over it. Yeah,
Yeah, that's your biggest beef, and I totally get that. Where you see this emotional scene, and then you can just run off a cliff, like after an emotional scene, and get your
exactly,
character, and you just respawn someplace. And it's sort of like
exactly.
this weird duality that's kind of going on with
And,
interactivity versus narrative. Yeah.
and there's also no stakes. And every once in a while, a game will have the balls to do this. Final Fantasy VII is a classic example, right?
Mm-hmm.
Killing
Mm-hmm.
off Eris was a ballsy move. That first time players, like, they invested time in this character. They leveled her up. They thought out her skill tree, gave her
Mm-hmm.
materia, and then halfway through the
Mm-hmm.
game, she's taken away, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you have no control over it. I mean, that was a ballsy move. Most games don't do that, right? Like in
Yeah.
Red Dead Redemption, you can jump James, whatever the character's name, off a cliff, and he dies, and you get the game over screen, and you just reload at the
And then
last
you
save.
just yeah,
There's
yeah.
there's no actual stakes in a video game, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And
But I mean,
in
again,
every cutscene
yeah.
that you watch, there's no worry about the character because you
But see,
know that if your character dies in that cutscene, then the game is over for the most part.
this is the challenge because I agree with you on this. But see,
Yeah.
then I can still apply this to Indiana Jones and watching Raiders of the Lost Ark. There's no stakes at all. It doesn't exist. So what? And that's where I'm at. Like, I totally agree with you. That's the thing that's so funny is like we debate this and talk about it, and I 100% agree. Yes, you could take John Marsden, throw him off a cliff, and then you'll respawn. You'll be good. Or you can watch Harrison Ford straddle the side of the truck. He's almost gonna die, but he's not gonna die because he's the main character. There's no stakes. You know exactly what's gonna happen.
Right.
He's gonna always shoot.
Right.
It's the same. So films do the same. They all suffer. To me, the mediums all suffer the same thing, and to me, that's why they're all lumped in as art anyway. Because
Yeah.
um, they're still being made by humans, and that's the one thing that separates us from the. I hate to sound so primal. That's
No.
what separates us from the animals is we do create stuff. We do
Yeah.
we do make art. And even in interactivity and programming, that's an art form, especially if you're really good at it and the skill. And you can look at code. I'm
Mm-hmm.
terrible at coding, but I can appreciate it.
Oh yeah.
As I've
Sure.
gone longer in life, I've seen really beautiful lines of code and really terrible lines of code. And one of them is an art form, like the way they handle it, the way they make the decisions, and one's garbagey. I mean, that's how. But see, this is where it's all subjective because we're talking about art,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
there's no your definition of art. I agree with that, like 85 to 95% of it, but then there's still that last 5% like, oh, I don't
Well,
throw
I
my
mean,
hands up.
and
because I'm
this
like,
is this is not a trap at all. I'm
yeah, yeah,
actually
yeah, yeah,
curious.
yeah.
what games do you consider art? Like, by my admittedly subjective definition, what
Hmm.
games do you consider art? Again, not a trap, just genuinely
No, it's
curious.
not. Here's the thing: is like, just like with film and movies, every video game
Mm-hmm.
could be considered art. But I
Mm-hmm.
don't consider every video game that's out there as art. I played. I mean, I'm like you. I've played over 1,000 games at this point. I work in games now, and what's even funnier now is the games that I work on are pretty much choose your own adventure interactive books,
Mm-hmm.
but they're games. But yet, is it a game or is it not? You're making a choice, but
Mm-hmm.
there's only a finite, and there's art that goes into it. There's writing that goes into it. But as far as the games that I consider art, just for me personally,
Yeah.
I mean, I love Red Dead Redemption, but I'm 100% in agreement with you with how you could throw John Marston off a cliff and watch it go, "Ugh," make those really funny sounds, and that takes me out of it. But then I go right back into it because for some reason Red Dead Redemption is like one of the very few games I can think of where it had resonance with me after I beat the game, and I was
Mm-hmm.
thinking about it long after, and I just felt like, wow, that was probably one of the best narrative type of games. For some reason I was drawn into the John Marston mythos and
Mm-hmm.
story, and I wanted to play it right so I
Mm-hmm.
could get to the end and beat the game. And then the other one, oddly enough, to me is probably it's kind of tied between Zelda 64 and Metroid
Mm-hmm.
Prime One. Reading a novel within the interactive environment of Samus's story and her, what is it, the Chozo? Is that the
Yeah, the Chozo. Yeah.
alien race? Yeah. Reading about all that stuff, adding backstory to a childhood character that I played Metroid. I
Mm-hmm.
played Metroid as a child
Mm-hmm.
during chicken pox, and like all of a sudden it added a layer of this history to
Yeah.
Samus, um, that uh, I absolutely adore that game. I think it's one of the best. It's one of my favorite games of all time. But and Zelda 64, there's not much text in there. You read the character, the villagers talk and stuff like that. But I just thought technology wise, from what the artists did, what the programmers did, I thought it was the pinnacle of what a video game could be in that time frame.
Mm-hmm.
And it set the bar really high for a lot of other games after that point. So, but again, I I'm with you though too. Like I'm always going back and forth on this because I don't think there's a right answer. Obviously for
No,
me, because
this isn't like this isn't
I
like
know, but it's so
right.
fascinating.
Yeah.
I have so much fun talking about it. That's why I
Yeah.
can't do any art tonight because we're talking about it so much.
Well, you say
Yeah.
Ocarina of Time, and I'm almost like saying, well, maybe that's not true because you're right. Like
Hmm.
the and it's there's not many. It's one or two, but BioShock obviously resonated with me in terms
Hmm.
of you finding out that it played with the tropes of video games, right? Players are so conditioned to get an objective and accomplish the objective, we never really consider whether or not our actions are good or bad. We just assume that
Hmm.
they're good because we're the ones playing it, right?
Hmm.
We
Hmm.
assume that we have agency because we're the ones playing it. And BioShock plays with that. The whole
Hmm.
story um, is basically about the illusion of choice. You play the game. It's even
Hmm.
kind of an open world. You can go back to some places, previous places, by hopping in the bathysphere and going back to other locations if you want to, even though there's no
Hmm.
need to, right?
Hmm.
Um, but then the big twist is, would you kindly, right? And you find out that your character has been brainwashed and conditioned from a very very young age, and then had their memory wiped. Um, and and there's this keyword, would you kindly, and then you do within the narrative structure, you do whatever it is that this anybody's uh, who says would you kindly before a command, you do it. Now you
Hmm.
think you're doing it willingly because you're the player, until you
Hmm.
find out that the character that you're playing as is actually been brainwashed and is doing it against their will, right?
Hmm.
And then you look back and you think back on the story, and every antagonist in the game who's giving you mission objectives always starts every mission objective with "Would you
Would
kindly?"
you kindly?
Yeah, it's brilliant. I mean, it's absolutely brilliant. And so maybe Bioshock is art, although from an interactive standpoint, it's a mediocre first-person shooter, right? I mean, I've played much better first-person shooters than Bioshock,
Hmm.
and the
Hmm.
stupid water pipe mini game is just needless, etc., etc., etc. But here's the thing, right? Like everything I just talked about was about the story, right? Because the gameplay is functional. It gets you from point A to point B, and then the twist is actually telling you that you playing the game, you're actually playing into the hands of the bad guys. That's the clever part. It's not the gameplay that's clever. It's all everything that surrounds the
it's
gameplay.
all the it's yeah.
And it's the same thing with the other one that resonated with me that maybe gets close to it is Majora's Mask, Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask.
Yeah.
Where, there are all these different storylines, and they are finite, but there are all these different storylines, and the choices that you make each time you reset the 3-day structure, you can make different choices that impact the characters' lives in different ways, right?
And then you ended up as you played it, you cared about those characters.
You do ultimately, because you live their experiences over and over and over again as you play through the game, right?
Yeah.
And it's almost half the game, actually. Completing the logbook of the characters' objectives there's only 4 dungeons in in Majora's Mask, and usually there's 8 dungeons in a traditional Zelda game, right?
Yeah.
And there's only 4 dungeons in it because fully half the game is just interacting with the world of Clocktown and seeing how the different characters approach the last 3 days that they're going to be alive, right? Really, really, really cool. I don't know. So I would argue that those 2 games, maybe they do reach my threshold for art, but again, here's where and this is exposing my bias, right? My threshold for art is story, and I think that that's what it is, right? Because I'm not talking about the gameplay of Zelda. I mean, Zelda gameplay was phenomenal. Like, there's no complaints there. The puzzles were amazing. The tools that you get were amazing. BioShock was a mediocre shooter, but it wasn't a bad shooter, right?
Yeah.
It's the stories. And it's the interactive nature of the stories that elevate both of those experiences for me. But I can't really, other than those 2 games, I can't really think of a game experience that has resonated with me the same way those 2 have.
Yeah, and they're definitely, and again, this is where bias, or in my case, snobbiness, whatever you want to call it, comes into play, and I just go, that I don't consider that a video game, but it doesn't really matter because humans will consider it a piece of art. Somebody will.
Oh yeah, no, I'm
crazy.
Oh yeah, I have friends who absolutely would. It's a hill that they will absolutely die on. That video games is art. Period. Full stop. Right? Like, it is the hill that they're going to die on. They've become so invested in it. Is Smash Brothers art? Yes. Right? Is Forza art? Yes. Why? Because it's a video game. It's like, well, that's kind of tautological, but okay.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, to me, it's just video games just as another medium, another delivery system to give us a visual art form. That's all it is.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
But I mean, it's funny though. But I find myself nodding my head a lot with you on plenty of it as to why there's criticism as to why it's not art. But ultimately, because again, I know it's such a stupid way to hinge everything. But once Marcel Duchamp put that stupid urinal in a museum and said that was art, everything really is.
Fair enough.
And so there's nothing you can do, As much as I want to be a snob, and I want to say, that's not art, I can't. Because guy ruined it for everybody. Ruined it for all humanity.
I don't...
Not really, but...
Yeah, no, but I think for me, the definite... And then I think that this is where... There's no point in arguing, and there's no point in saying right or wrong, because I think the definition of art is in the eye of the beholder. Like, that toilet, I don't think that's art. I don't care what any art critic says. To me, it does not meet my definition of art, right?
But what's funny here, but here's what's funny. We zoom out a little bit. Yes, that toilet is. We're talking about toilet now.
Yeah.
Toilet, I'm with you. It's not art, but you know what it is? You know what makes it art is the idea or the story behind it, which again goes back to what we're talking about with video game. Like, you didn't care about the floating gun and the FPS engine that made that BioShock game, but you know what? The story of stupid Duchamp's toilet. It's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, if you, but I think what I will say about books and television and movies and fine art, because there's no other word for it, in video games, what they all are representations of expression, and frankly, that's more important than whether or not something is art, right? It is a way that humanity expresses itself, and human beings are. I'm going to be a little bit pessimistic here, but I also don't think I'm wrong, fundamentally narcissistic creatures, right? Verging on solipsistic in some instances, right? We
Mm-hmm.
love ourselves. We are fascinated with ourselves, right? Um,
Mm-hmm.
even in the rare movie that features only lions, tigers, and bears, they're really just humans that look like lions, tigers, and bears, right? They're not actually
Mm-hmm.
lions and tigers, right? If you want to see
Mm-hmm.
lions and tigers, you have to watch things like Planet Earth. But then,
Yeah.
like, what do you think about Planet Earth? It's like, oh my God, David Attenborough's narration is so amazing. I'm like,
Yeah.
what about the lions? Oh yeah, they were cool too. But God, what a great narrator he is,
Mm, yeah.
and or Richard Attenborough, I don't remember. One of them is an actor, but
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm forgetting off the top of my head. But anyway, yeah, human beings are narcissists, just fundamentally, evolutionarily, right? The more narcissistic you are, the more likely you are to survive, because human beings, it's all about survival of the fittest, right?
Mm-hmm.
The prettiest, the smartest, the strongest, they're the ones who are most likely going to breed. So why wouldn't you be narcissistic? And and so as a result, like, we, because our brains are such tool driven and narcissistic, I think it's that combination of those two things that make this need to express ourselves in ways that I think a lot of other animals don't feel the need to express themselves in, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's a combination of factors that make it so that human beings need to express them. There is an innate need to express ourselves, right? And whether or not you consider video games art, whether or not you consider that toilet art, what it is it is an expression of our own humanity, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And again, that goes back to what makes us different than the animals is that's comes out of what's humanistically possible from us.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But what's again, and this is a whole other subject. That, like your more bleak, pessimistic view of humanity. I mean, that's we could delineate that into animals too. Animals still express themselves too. With what we perceive humanistically, as happiness, sadness, pain, um, when when they do a mating dance, all
Mm-hmm.
kinds of stuff like that. We still see it, but
Yeah,
humans were the only ones that have mastered the tools to do
to make it
what we consider.
permanent, right? That's
Yeah.
the difference, right? You've
Hmm.
seen those hilarious birds that have those preposterous feathers, and they integrate it into their mating dance, right?
Yeah.
Um, but it's not permanent. It's only permanent because a human being recorded it. Otherwise, it's ephemeral and it disappears, right?
But it's not. But here's the thing: this again, this is more abstract. But is it permanent because they do procreate and they keep going, and we still see them? So therefore,
Yeah, but that
they're successful.
their expression is successful for themselves, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But like, you know, the people who made Red Dead Redemption didn't do it to procreate. I mean, by proxy they did, because they got paid to produce this piece of art, therefore that they could survive, find a mate, and then provide for their offspring. Like, so I guess in sort of a very broad sense they did it to procreate, but it's not the
Yeah.
same as the bird with the feathers that is
Huh?
directly intended to procreate, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So our expression is, it goes beyond the very functional aspect of most animals' expression, right?
Mm-hmm.
Our expression is much broader than that, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's
Sure.
not necessarily directly designed for sex.
Yeah.
I
No.
mean,
There's human condition. Pretty
mm-hmm,
much anything on
mm-hmm,
all aspects of it. There's something that's being commented on as we do art for sure.
mm-hmm.
Um, yeah. Man. Heavy subject, man. I wish we like I said, I was ready to do some art tonight, but my two core processor was preoccupied. I couldn't.
No,
I
that's
can't. I don't think I
fine.
could do. I don't think I could have done 3D sculpting tonight at the same time as talking about this because I have so much fun talking about it too. Anyway, I
Yeah,
think it's just fun talking
yeah,
about
and
this
I'm not
type of
trying to
stuff.
change anybody's mind, and obviously I'm not even right. There is no right. There's no wrong, right?
Yeah, but it's still fun to
But that's the
discuss it, though.
fun thing, yeah, to talk about is just, again, I'm a narcissist. You're a narcissist. We're all narcissists in our own ways
Yes.
because we're
Yeah.
humans, and
Yeah.
that's just the nature of humanity. Um, and and there was someone told me once, if you want to be an artist, if you want to tell stories, you have to be a narcissist because you have to want people to see what you're doing. If you write something
And
just for
nobody sees it.
yourself
What's the
and no one
point?
sees it,
Yeah.
what's the point, right? Telling yourself stories is fun, but the real point of telling stories is for other people to see it. And if you have the courage to let other
Share it.
people see it and share it, then there has to be an element of self-aggrandizement that goes along with it. Because if you write a story and then you can't have people interpreting it in their own way and potentially not liking it, and your confidence is going to be destroyed and you're never going to tell another story, right?
Mm-hmm.
Your
Mm-hmm.
ego has to be healthy enough that when someone inevitably doesn't like what you're producing, it doesn't
Yeah.
stop you from producing, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Like, for instance, you know, the first time I got on stage and did a really bad scene doing improv, and it was just
Mm-hmm.
flop sweat from head to toe.
Mm.
When I got off stage, my first thought wasn't, "Oh my God, I'm never going to do this again." It was, "I want to
Yeah.
do this again right now because I can do better, and I know I'm better
Yeah.
than this." Right?
Yeah. Yeah. Sure. Sure. Yeah. Yeah. The only other thing is, only other thing is like, I don't know if you necessarily have to have an audience because I think there's plenty of things that I do on my own, writing or doing a drawing, and I just do it just to see if I can do it.
Mm-hmm.
But there is still ego there because I want to see if I can do it. I mean, if you don't do anything, then I don't know how you exist in the world. Period. But
Well, I
I
mean,
don't. You don't have to always have an audience. It doesn't have to always be centered around adulation or adoration. I guess that's the only thing. It's just a subtle because there's other elements of it that you could do where you're challenging yourself and you enjoy that. Just kind of similar, same thing. If you didn't have an audience, that's one thing for improv, but that little inkling that makes you want to do it, I could see you doing that for something else, just for yourself, just
mm,
to see if you could pull it off. I'm not sure what it would be off the top of my head, as we talk, but
yeah.
there's an element where these humans do like to challenge our inner selves a little bit anyway,
Mm-hmm.
regardless of if it's public or not. That's just my only take on it, but
Yeah, sure. I mean, people practice, right?
mm-hmm.
Like,
Yeah,
people, artists draw to keep themselves, sharp. Basketball
yeah,
players, they
true.
practice in the off season to keep themselves focused. I journal. I work on
Mm-hmm.
outlines,
Yeah, it
but
ultimately does
ultimately,
add to your yeah.
yeah, ultimately what it's doing is it's adding to your public presentation of stuff,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
A
Mm-hmm.
skill you learn on your own, a new type of, rendering technique that you teach yourself will be incorporated into the work that you want to present publicly.
See, and I think that's where it could be purposeful or it could be accidental because let's use another piece of art. There's that
Okay.
Steve Carell. There's a Steve Carell movie where he starred with who's the actor from Ant Man, the main guy.
Oh, yeah, Paul Rudd.
Oh, right.
Are you talking
Remember
Dinner
when
for
there was
Schmucks?
yes, and then wasn't Steve? And I could be misremember this, but Steve Carell's character was all about making these little taxidermy mice for
Mm-hmm.
himself. He
Mm-hmm.
wasn't intending to have everybody else look at it, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I could see that. I mean, there's humans that do that just because they want to do it for their own little world, their own little space, and they want to just kind of create just for the sake of creating,
Mm-hmm.
or live in a space where they can get away, escape humanity, because humanity. If you have a very negative outlook on humanity, that's maybe I could see somebody constructing that and doing that.
Sure,
And
but
still
I
that
but I
piece of
mean,
art.
yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, yeah, but the whole movie was, you know, Dinner for Schmucks. I didn't like because it
Mm.
had all these claims. At the end, the outcasts, the weirdos, win, right? But
It's been so long since I've seen it, but
the
yeah, I'll take your
movie
word for it.
then spends the entire movie, the entire runtime for most of it, making fun of them, right?
Hmm.
Not
Yeah,
ironically. I mean, Steve
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Carell
Being
is
mean
a
about it.
loser.
Yes.
At the end of the
Yeah,
movie,
being mean
he's
about it.
still a loser. Like, he
Yes.
defeated the people who were exploiting him,
Hmm.
but the script itself made him a loser, right?
Yeah, yeah,
And
it wasn't
so,
favorable to him. Yeah.
right, it wasn't at any point favorable to him. So it is saying, and it is saying in a sense that someone who does do taxidermied squirrels or mice, um, and dresses them up in weird poses and doing it just for themselves is dumb, and it is not a worthwhile effort, right?
Hmm.
Now,
Yeah.
you know, I lost the thread a little bit there, but I guess my point
I,
is that
mhm.
at the end of the movie, he does show it off. He's
Yeah, yeah.
excited when Paul Rudd shows interest in it,
Shares,
right?
yeah, shares, yeah. Hmm. Hmm.
So if he weren't excited about it, then he wouldn't have gone to that dinner. If it really was just about himself, he wouldn't have said, no, 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 this is just for me. I'm not going to go to the dinner and see this. At the
Hmm.
end of the day, he
Hmm.
did want to share that, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
When someone
Sure.
showed interest in it, he was afraid. It's not that he didn't want to share that with people. He
Hmm.
was afraid that they wouldn't understand it and appreciate it if he did, right?
Hmm. Hmm. I'm being more. Yeah, I'm not really commenting on the movie itself. I'm commenting on the act of what he was doing for art
Right,
for
right.
himself, and I could see another human being doing that just for themselves. Is all I'm trying to get at. You know,
I
like.
would argue, and I have no
Mhm.
evidence.
Mm, yeah.
I would argue that, let's say that someone is doing this in the real world, right?
Uh huh.
Doing tax,
Yeah.
and I've actually seen. I mean, it wasn't invented in whole cloth. I mean, if you've been to any sort of curio shop, you've seen taxidermied mice in Hawaiian shirts,
Hmm.
right?
Sure. Sure.
I would argue that someone who does that and doesn't show it to anybody, they're not doing it because they're only trying to please themselves. They're doing it because they're too afraid to share
It
it.
could be that. Oh, absolutely. It
It's
could be
not that
that
they
too. Yeah,
don't
for
want to
sure.
share it, it's that they're too afraid to share it. The compulsion to be creative is there, but it's their fear of rejection is what keeps them from sharing it. Not that they don't want to share it. They're too
See now,
afraid to.
I could totally see that. But here's the other thing: is I think it could be therapeutic, and that's why it stays personal for an artist. And so they sit there in their basement and they don't do it for any audience at all because they're doing it because they want to go into a Zen state. They want to it's a form of meditation for them, and then that's it. And they move on, and then they go about the rest of their day dealing with their lives. I could see that. I mean, I can't think of like I can think of like pieces of art that I've done that I don't share with anybody.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't care if anybody ever sees it. I just wanted to do it, and it gives me a chance to escape and like go
Yeah.
someplace else. You know,
Yeah, no. I have a
and that's
journal
just me
that's.
though.
I have a journal that's
Yeah,
80,000 words long. I mean, it's a
yeah,
novel's length long, and it's not intended. I don't want people to see that, right?
yeah. It's never gonna see the light of day, right? Yeah,
But I mean, it's not intended for that. But I also write a ton of stuff that I do want
yeah.
people to see, right? So,
Hmm.
you
So
know,
you could use that. Yeah, you could say your justification is even if you're writing in a journal on your own, it's adding to your external self. I totally
absolutely,
get that.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And
See,
so,
like I've done art where it has no. I don't know. I guess I could try to make it a stretch and say that it did something to help add to something public. I guess. I don't know. It's been so long. I mean, most of my art now, everything I do now is pretty much for public. But when I was younger, I would do plenty of stuff that was private. That I had no intention of ever adding anything to a public persona. But I don't know. Yeah, yeah, interesting.
yeah. So I don't know. Again, there's not a right or wrong here. It's a fun thought experiment, you know.
Yeah. Hmm. Well, with all that said, I was going to share my screen and show you some public stuff, but I
Yeah,
don't
now
know. I guess
we're
so
like,
this week.
ironically, we're almost 50 minutes in and we haven't shared anything
Oh man,
other than our
maybe
general thoughts on the nature of
it's so much
storytelling and
easier to talk.
expression.
Yeah, it's so much easier to talk about superficial stuff. Man, I blame you on this one.
Well,
I can't. I had to require all my processing power tonight.
that's
I'm
fine.
sorry.
Nothing wrong
My
with that.
apologies.
It's something I think it's worthwhile because at the end
Uh
of the
huh.
day,
Yeah.
we are working on something that could be terrible. I mean, we don't think it's terrible.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. We don't think it's terrible, and I don't. At the
It,
end of the day, if people hate it,
but it's,
what can I do? You
right. I
know?
mean, it's a risk that we're taking that we want to take, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so having this conversation, I think, is valuable because again, it provides context for the way we create and why we create and what has influenced us and inspired us,
Yeah. So it's funny. Like I don't know. I know we have to wrap this up at some point, but
Right.
it's funny. Like when we first started this stream, I think and again, if I remember, I think I posed this idea to you to do a stream weekly, and that was right in the height of the pandemic. And for
Mm-hmm.
me,
Mm-hmm.
the reason why I wanted to do it because actually it wasn't because the original reason was not because of ego. I don't think for either of us, but I mean, I'm speaking only on my behalf, and then on your side,
No, I want it to be
and your
amazing.
side.
I want
Yeah,
a million people to
yeah.
see it. I want people to say that we created something great. Like I'm not shy about that, right? I
So,
think that
but
this is something that's worthwhile, and I want
sure,
people to see it, right?
sure. But for me, like the stream is
Mm.
different than the actual output of the art piece, and I'm with
Mm-hmm.
you on that. Like, yeah, I want it to be the greatest thing since sliced bread. Sure, sure. I mean, that's my mentality for it. But doing the stream itself was mainly because with the pandemic and people were panicked and stuff like that. For me, I felt a sense of it,
Mm-hmm.
and for me, I wanted us to do the stream just simply because I enjoy adrenaline. This is a personal thing. I enjoy adrenaline and doing something live and failing miserably and not caring. That's one thing, and also just entertaining people and giving them an escape to hang out with us if at all, which has not really worked out that well. And that's fine, whatever, But those are the two main things because no matter what, I was still going to work on this whether live or not, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that was my personal reason as to why when I approached you with let's do a live stream, it was in the heart of a pandemic. I've been wanting to kind of do something live streamy for a while, drawing something and talking about pop culture stuff. But I thought that was a good enough reason to do it. And here we are still doing it now
Yeah.
today.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
and so for you, I don't know if you had any personal reflection on the stream itself, not Calamity Jane. I'm talking about just the stream portion of it.
Um. I mean, I've got a face for radio and a voice for the written word. So, um,
You mean both? Yeah,
uh,
we both have a face for radio. Let's put it
yeah.
that way.
And I mean, I enjoy doing the stream and talking with you about it. I guess in as much as we've got 2 years of content that anybody can go back and watch at any point, if I really didn't want people to see it, I could press the delete button on that right
Yeah,
now and
yeah, easily.
disappear it from the universe right now. But I leave it up
Hmm.
there because I want people to see it. I mean, I think we have fun conversations, and I think if people went back and watched them, they'd enjoy some of the things that we're talking about because I think what we're talking about is worthwhile, and I think we're
Hmm.
intelligent, informed artists,
Hmm.
and I think we have something to say. And I don't think it's limited to Calamity Jane. I mean, I think we've talked a lot about Calamity Jane, and to an extent, again, this is sort of by proxy, but to an extent, everything that we talk about on our streams ties back into Calamity Jane because it's representative of our
Yep.
creative process and what influences. And
Yep.
I've said this a million times on the stream, but everything that we talk about is a part of us, and Calamity Jane is our creation. Therefore, it is also a part of us,
Yeah.
and so it's all connected, right?
Hmm.
And so in that sense, yeah, I do this for people to see it, and I do this for people to share, and I'd love for us to find an audience at some point who wants to go back and watch this and gain insight into our creative process and what makes us tick, and maybe even make them appreciate the stuff that we're creating more because they understand where we're coming from, right?
Yeah, it's possible. Yeah, it'd be really cool to connect in that way. But
Yeah.
it's like yeah, yeah. I think you put it eloquently, and there's nothing else I can really say or I'd ruin it. Which I tend to do a lot
Nah,
anyway.
nah, nah,
So
nah, nah.
yeah,
But anyway, yeah. So I guess I do want people to see this because if I didn't, I could delete it all right now.
sure, sure, fair enough. Well, cool, man. I think
Yeah,
for
we're
me at least,
55 minutes in at this point. This is
yeah,
one of our longer ones, and you didn't do one lick of art, so. But that's fine. Like
yeah.
it was a night for me, right? It was a night for let's just to
Ah,
focus on my nonsense. It's not as nearly as interesting to watch people press enter on a screen and then tab to do a character line, It's far more interesting to see someone model in real time. So.
Yeah, but we'll get back to it next week for sure. But yeah.
Well, actually, not. I'm going to be
Oh,
out of
yeah.
town next week. Good. So thank you. This is perfect as we wrap it up. It's a great
Mm-hmm.
transition. I will be out of town next week, so no stream next week, everybody. But then the week after, things will be back to normal. It's been a crazy January, right? It's just as the
Yeah.
year gets started. I've been remarkably busy for a January, so and you have too, actually. So
Yeah, yeah, for both of us. Yeah,
yeah.
it's been a yeah, jumping on planes, everything. So,
Mm-hmm.
but all good.
Mm-hmm.
It'll get back to
It will.
hopefully, knock on iPad screen, it'll get back to normalcy within about 2 weeks ish.
Yeah, in about 2 weeks. Yeah. Anyway,
Yeah.
as we wrap up here, reminder you can always find us at calamityjane.rocks. It'll take you right to our Patreon site. Please consider joining us, subscribing, and helping us make this silly cartoon a reality. And if you help us, then we'll wax even more intellectual about all this sort of nonsense that we love and are passionate about. You can also check us on Facebook. That's generally where we do updates for things like, hey, the stream is not going to be on next week, which I'll post to Facebook in a little bit. We also post the links to our streams there as well as on our Patreon site. Also, make sure to head over to Twitter at Jane Salamander. We do 3-tweet stories every week that shows a little bit of insight into the world of Calamity Jane. And 4 years from now, when we're the next big thing, you'll be able to go back and look at all those tweets and realize that we've planned all of this already. So. Anyway, that's it for the night. If you stuck around this long, much appreciated because you didn't get any art today. It was just our ugly mugs talking about the art of expression and story.
Apologies again.
No apologies needed. We're beautiful people. We're beautiful people. In any case, we'll see you in 2 weeks. Stay safe out there, everybody. Good night.
Good night.
All right.